Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're discussing the national news of the day, and we're going to start with what would normally be kind of trivial, except that due to very unique math in this particular election, it could be significant. But there are two states that do not have winner take all systems for selecting their electoral college voters. And one is Maine and one is Nebraska, and what has happened over the last few elections is Trump has won the first district in Maine, and the Democrat, I think not in 2016, but Obama won it, and then Biden won it the last time. Has won the second district in Nebraska, which contains Omaha, so it's got some kind of city voters. And I wouldn't say it's a liberal place, but it's very democratic and certainly much less conservative than the other three districts of Nebraska. Normally, it would just be kind of an interesting, little exercise. In most election historically, that the votes have all gone to one or the other in both of those states, but times have changed, and and also for years, ever since Obama won it in 2008, there have been Republicans who have tried to repeal that and make it winner take all. There's been a lot of resistance to it, even from Republicans in the state, because I think they kind of see the Nebraska tradition as making it different from everybody else's. They appreciate that. And sure enough, there was an attempt this year to change Nebraska to winner take all, to eliminate that potential electoral college vote for Harris. And the problem was that the governor of Maine was threatening to then negate or to go to winner take all in Maine, thus making it be a wash. But Maine's constitution shortened has a much stricter deadline for any such action to be taken. So the Republicans, some people would argue in a very Machiavellian sense, waited for the deadline to arrive at Maine and then threatened to do it again. But it was blocked by a couple of Republicans. And we can talk a little bit about that. But this wouldn't have been stealing the election technically, because it's certainly, you have a natural process. It's not like they were doing anything illegal, unethical. I don't know. I guess it depends on what your ethos is. But this is the key as to why it's really important. Right now, we've got 7 battleground states. I would argue there are actually a couple more, but we know for a fact that we've got 7 states where elections are close, where the polls have had both Trump and Harris, or at least have them within 1 point, but if not having both of them ahead at different times in the polls. And the math is this. Trump has done much better in the Sun Belt states of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina than he has been doing in the blue wall or Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. If Harris was to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania and lose all of the Sun Belt states, she can win with the Omaha electoral college member. This, of course, also assumes that nobody in either party is going to switch votes. That has been known to happen too, and there's some laws about that in some states, and that gets complicated. But it could be that close, where Harris has 270, and that's a completely possible scenario, since you have 3 states with similar demographics. It's very likely they could all go for one. The Sun Belts, you've got 2 separate demographics. You've got the 2 southern states, and then you've got the 2 southwestern states. But it's plausible. that this is the action. So that those two Republicans who resisted this change, they may have to go into hiding after this if in fact Harris does win because of that vote. Now, there's no guarantee that Harris is going to win that either. Clinton didn't win it. I'm not sure Obama won it in his second race, but the polls there, if you trust polls for populations that small, show that she probably will win it. Dave, is there any other reason that this is this is important?
Yeah, I think you hit on most of the key issues, but let's just kind of sort of rebase one element here, which is that it I think that the fact that there are only 2 states out there right now that are that apportion their electoral college representation electors based on the congressional districts, that's been like an aspirational reality. So it's one of those things where it actually serves as for lack of a better way to say it, like a role model. These states are role models to other states as a way to just to have a more democratic small d process. Because as of right now, there are 50 states and only 7, 8, 10 are considered competitive at all. So yeah. This is a model that actually matters. Just imagine if California and New York did it, right? There's so many people that live in those 2 states, or Texas, those 3 states, right? So there have been movements to try to embrace something more democratic as a way, if we can't get rid of the electoral college, just to reform it. And this is a way to do it. So that's one thing. But it's a rule, it's a policy, it's a practice. States get to decide how they want to do it. For the most part, right here. So this is one of those things where it's completely legal and legitimate to change, because people are saying, let's change 48 states in some circles to match these 2. So if the flip side can also be true, that if one of those states wants to revert back to the winner take all system, then they're entitled to do so. It's getting smeared as a last minute tactic, which it also is. 2 things can be true at once. And in fact, one of the weird consequences of this whole or byproducts of this whole system is that Maine got involved. So the House Majority Leader in Maine, her name's Maureen Terry, she said that Maine would be forced to act if Nebraska did, just to level the playing field, and they too would return to our winner-take-all system, because they also have a demographic in one district that is that differs in its disposition compared to the state overall. So in Nebraska, we've got 2-to-1 Republicans in that state, and Omaha area around the city is closer to parity. So people, instead of going to 7 states, they're going in some cases to 9, or they're expanding it a little bit more. Some are going to Texas, some are right. Florida, for example. But the idea is that, like I said about Maine, is that their system, like you said, their system they would have only allowed a change up to 90 days ahead of time. So there was a little bit of pushback from folks saying this just isn't the right time to do it so close to an election. And in fact, that was persuasive enough for Nebraska Senator Mike McDonald. He said he was voting his conscience against changing the status quo so close to the election. But he was called out by Donald Trump for that, as you mentioned, that like he now potentially there are people that support Donald Trump that think this might have been a slight to him. And so he was, Senator McDonald, this is considered something fairly bold. But he really did, he said like people should come to Omaha, earn the vote. We work hard, we play by the rules, and other people should too. If somebody did it in an off year, that it would be more fair. Give everybody on the merits 2 years to decide. Take it to the voters, and don't let 30 state senators be the ones that decide this important detail. I'll talk more about the Electoral College breakdown with you, but that's my big cut.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting if it comes down to Omaha. I mean, that's that is a really big thought. I know that Tim Walz has already made a visit there during the campaign. I don't know if Harris has. I imagine she will make a stop there. I don't know if either Trump or Vance have. I have not seen that, and maybe everybody will probably just wait for the last moment, especially if the polls are indicating edges to Trump in the 4 states I talked about, and to Harris in the 3 states. So I'm going to have a prediction about an 8th state that is neither Maine nor Nebraska, by the way. But we'll talk about that later. But I mean, this is how the Electoral College swings. There has been talk in California of doing that proportional because it is more democratic. We've got, I forget how many electoral colleges, many districts as we have, but I don't think that anybody in California would be willing to do it unless there was, and they've talked about this, a pact with red states with equal numbers, or at least relatively equal numbers. Maybe, Texas and Oklahoma combined or something. I don't know. I'm not sure if that does the math, but they have a pact that they will switch to not proportional representation necessarily. It can still be disproportionate based on the geography, but distributing the district, having each congressional district choose its own electoral college. And so that would mean that a few in the Valley and a few in Southern California would probably go to Republicans. So would other states do this just to make elections more interesting? The interest in this is that the rest of the states feel neglected. It comes down to these right now 7 states plus Omaha, and possibly another one. I mean, occasionally they're making appearances outside of those areas for fundraisers or for special events that are symbolic, sufficiently symbolic. But if California had that, we'd definitely have people here. We'd have Harris going into the Valley. We'd have Trump out on the coast trying to win over new votes, at least or at least in swing places like Trinity. Well, I probably wouldn't bother Trinity County, but so something like that. And the other states that were part of that pact would benefit. But it's not the reform that many of us progressives like. We want a parliamentary system, right? We want proportional representation across the board. But to be fair, Wyoming would probably never see a presidential candidate again, or at least in a lot of the rural areas. You got to go where the biggest bang is. And but I think as a compromise, it could be something. But to be clear, the math would still make it possible that you could win the majority of the popular vote and still lose the electoral college vote, even with that Democratic reform.
Yeah. So you asked earlier about how many congressional districts. So California is 52, New York is 26, so it'd be 54 and 28. So you're talking a significant portion of the overall body of the Electoral College. It's just these big states. So I think that'd be interesting. I do want to agree with you that your premise, which is why is this one just so important? It's because it just so happens that there are some states that are so solidly red and some states that are so solidly blue that they're not even being competitive. And that, like you said, there's there is an outcome that, based on the probabilities that if Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are in alignment and in favor of Harris, like you said, and also if Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina are in favor of Trump, that it would be without that one vote, it would be 269 to 269. So if McDonald rather, if he didn't choose this path for Nebraska and cut off debate and prevent the governor from holding a special session that would have approved this reform despite its unpopularity in the state of Nebraska, the Republicans could have pushed it through. We could have been looking at a 269 outcome, which is pretty wild to imagine that it does go to the states. And we live in extraordinary times, but I don't know.
Or would Trump have 270 at that point if he gets all 4? So
if it was only one being lost, right, because of Maine. So if Maine, it would go. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So people, I'm looking at. You're right. I'm looking at at two different graphics,
yeah,
and so, but the point is that if these two states rather were to have done it differently, we could have, it could have gone this way. Um, because Trump would have regardless, 1876 was the closest election in history. They're talking about this being the closest since 1960. um, and people have tried gimmicks in the past, like the alternative elector scheme gimmick that Trump tried last cycle in 2020. That actually first happened in Hawaii in 1960. So we do see these parties trying everything like that's legally possible.
hmm
And it's not illegal to have tried it in
right,
Nebraska. I do want to say, I know we're just in our closing minutes here. There is also a push to have a compact of states that agree that all of their electors will go to the winner of the popular vote in their
right,
state,
yeah,
and that if 270 enough states with 270 delegates were all to agree to that, then they would have this critical mass,
yeah.
and so it
But
would
so
be
far, it's just
a
blue states
voluntary.
proposing that. It's just blue states proposing that. So
Yeah, exactly,
it,
exactly.
The goals are the same for all Americans.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
There you go again. And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
okay, October 1, next Tuesday, we have the long-awaited Tim Walz, vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket, versus Vance on the Republican ticket. It is happening, and it is probably one of the most anticipated vice presidential debates ever. In fact, there are there's argument among the pundits and experts. Some disagree, but others are saying that this is the one VP debate in history, and we've had vice presidential debates since 1976, when Carter and Ford each had their people, Mondale and why am I forgetting his name? A big guy with an arm injury. Anyway, he ran for president in 1996.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole. Yeah, they debated. That was the first ever televised vice presidential debate. They did not have one in 1980. Couldn't reach an agreement on it. And then Geraldine Ferraro and George Bush started a trend, and ever since then, there's been one vice presidential debate. But they're saying that this one could actually make a difference in the election. And I'm going to turn it over to you real quickly here. There's a lot to discuss for a preview, but I think that the Democrats and Tim Walz make a mistake if they underestimate Vance's debating skills. He is done poorly on the trail because he doesn't talk to people well. He's not a people person. He's, we've seen the donut shop, and more recently, people are making fun of him because, he holds up a flat of eggs and says a dozen eggs for over $4, and there's signs behind him with at least with the cheaper eggs being $2.99 a dozen. He's gaff filled in that sense, but he's also really smart. Don't treat him like people treated Dan Quayle or Sarah Palin, because he's very smart. Will he come across as personable? Tim Walz's job is easy. He just has to keep doing what he's doing. He has to look good, look presidential, have a sense of humor, which will come. He doesn't have to win the debate. He just has to sell the candidacy. But Vance has a bit at stake. He's got to prove that he's worthy of it, and the bar is low right now. So I say that there's a pretty good chance that they'll call the debate a draw, in which case it'll have zero impact on the race, other than Vance won't be hurting the ticket anymore, at least on Tuesday.
Yeah, I tend to agree with most of what you said. I think big picture, this, as we've seen, this is an extraordinary year, extraordinary election cycle. The candidate changed so late in the process for the Democrats. That was a shift. Instead of having to debate Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance will be debating Walz, which is a very different person. And also, instead of being able to beat up on the administration for the post-COVID expenses and deficits and immigration problems and some of the other things that were directly tied to Biden's leadership, it's a little bit harder to blame the vice president for the economy that happened on their watch. But that, of course, that's what Vance's goal, that's the tactics and strategy. That's what they'll be doing. But so because of the late change, and then there was the Trump debate where he performed poorly. There was the conventions. So there's only been a handful of very recent nationally prominent events, and so this is the last big nationally prominent event, assuming that Trump doesn't agree to another debate, which he said he's not going to, for reasons that we've discussed before. And I don't think he ever puts himself back in that situation to feel the way he felt that night after being defeated so handily. But again, there's that big national case that needs to be made. But realistically, it's really just two people where one side is saying we are for making the affirmative case for the Harris presidency. It's basically saying this is what we are aspiring to distance from the past. Versus, with Vance, realistically, he's going to probably stay on brand. And what, he's been that sort of attack dog role for Donald Trump and Donald Trump's policies. But he has his own baggage, obviously, that we've seen through these, releases of past statements. He was relatively prolific in podcasts, and he wrote a book, and he's been contributing to other pieces like the foreword to Project 2025. He wrote a piece there. He wrote one of the elements that is very controversial about policies that Republicans would support in a Trump administration. So it's one of those, realistically, there are very few undecided voters. So independent, moderate voters are going to be the ones who theoretically will be deciding the race this time around, in addition to just, motivating the base. But here's big picture. This is it took a long way to get to this. I still think that you're going to Vance's general angle will be, hey, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Right.
And there's a lot of anxiety out there, and there's a lot of mistrust of government overall. So the incumbents are at a disadvantage. And then the flip side will be Walz will be out there trying to make the case, that Vance and Trump are basically not in alignment with American values, and that their policies will be too disruptive. So I think that's the general takeaway, which confirms sort of what you said. It's possible to be a draw because they both can affirmatively make their cases without really having too much success against each other.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think Walz just has to continue being the charming person and be articulate. I really don't see him getting flustered at all. I'm not quite sure. He laughs stuff off easily, so I don't see how he loses. I just think that Vance can do his campaign better by restoring a little bit of confidence in it. Debates have made a big difference. Presidential debates have made a big difference. Nixon, Kennedy, probably decided it. He showed up on television, not as good looking or as charismatic as John Kennedy. Ford was doing okay until he said that the Soviet Union had no dominance over Eastern Europe, and then everybody realized he didn't know. He was not just uninformed in foreign policy, but in basic political geography. And then in Carter, you had there you go again moment. I don't think that won or lost it for him, but it was certainly an iconic moment when Reagan said that. I mean, we've had you had George Bush in 1992 looking at his watch. That became a big deal. I mean, things like that happen. And Obama had a horrible first debate in 2012. Everybody's like wondering where is Obama? Who is this guy? That was really mismanaged Obama. They were not letting him be who he needed to be. The very next debate he came out and he was just all over the place, and Romney running circles around Romney, and even managed to finesse Candy Weiss, helping him out with a fact check that she instantly regretted having done, and after having lured Romney in. I mean, so they can make a big difference. Clinton was perceived, and the polling showed that she won all three of the debates, but it proved to not be a deciding factor because we had the Comey moment just about a week after the last debate. The last time around, Biden, will you shut up, man? That probably won the case for him. Maybe it wasn't the only factor, no, but that probably did it for him. And of course, we know how the debates have gone this time, both of them having effects that we don't even have to go into. Everybody has memories of that. So here we are in a very close race, and I can't see what kind of gaffe or mistake that Tim Walz could do unless he has a sudden, brain injury or something like that. I think that he's disciplined, and I think that he could easily avoid answering the questions that he doesn't want to and look like he's done it. That's what you have to do in a debate. You just have to be entertaining. And so, I just, Vance has had a hard time in speeches, but maybe he'll be better in this format. He's really smart. He's being undersold as being dumb. He's not. He wrote a very good book, right? I mean, it's he knows his stuff. He may have kind of compromised his ethics by some of our standards, but and as I said, he's not a people person. He doesn't like people. That's the problem, is that Trump chose a running mate that doesn't like people. But the only person he has to deal with in this case are the CBS moderators.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak to Vance first, I suppose here. One thing to keep in mind is that Trump does have a 21-point gender gap right now.
Yeah.
So he's pivoting in the last few days to try to speak to women, to kind of rebuild some connection that's slipping away from their side, but not very successfully at this point. I just don't think that that Vance really knows how tone deaf that he comes across as sometimes.
Right.
Like the example of that the institution of marriage has so much sanctity that women ought to stay in violent marriages. I think that's the kind of thing he probably regrets saying, but it's an example of the type of approach, weakness, the Achilles heel, so to speak, for Walz, is that some of the approaches, that like Trump's appeal. The reason that Vance was so appealing, I think, to Trump to be the vice president is because he's so unrepentant. That he definitely has strong convictions. He's speaking to the base. He's popular amongst the base, and as you take those circles of the ripple effect of what that means to appeal to the base so viscerally, speaking to young men, speaking to Christian conservatives, speaking to hardcore MAGA Trump folks. That's why Walz came up with the creepy and weird put down.
Yeah.
Because trying to play on that appeal or that resonance that the GOP as a party is hostile to women. So I think that's Vance's. If Vance can he's Ivy League educated, he's successful in multiple spheres of the economy, writing, and also military experience. So he's got skills and assets that will, like you said, he will be strong under fire. And like I said, I think that's why Trump picked him to debate against Harris, because as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, well, that Vance's skill set would match up well with that. Whereas Walz, on the other hand, Walz has got that successful track record in his state as governor, and also like all the folksy attributes we've seen on the trail. Plus, as a lifelong educator and National Guards member. He, like you said, he just needs to be himself, the type of person that leads by example, respectful of women will go a long way, actually, in contrast with Vance. And in fact, I think he also has to balance that with being tough. So he's going to have to be tough because Vance is going to be very forceful. But hold Vance to account for the things he's said in the past, to shed light on highlight the differences, but really maintaining balance and a positive message. So like we talked about throughout this segment, I think that they both are capable, highly skilled and capable at accomplishing what they intend to accomplish. As long as they steer clear of each other's worst weapons, then it'll end up being a wash, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if the moderators are empowered to fact check this time around, but if they are, they're probably going to try to fact check Walz as much as they fact check Vance. More likely they just won't do it at all, because they took some flack for it last time. The problem is that Trump told 33 lies and Harris only told one, and even that was iffy as a lie. She said that there are no American troops in a war zone, and it all comes down to how you define a war zone, right? So it was so they didn't have anything to fact check her on. So they may just decide to stay out of it. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the rules are that they are supposed to stay out of it. I don't know. I haven't looked that up, but it's it'll be fun to watch. They're both very smart, very interesting. The one thing that one area where Walz could be is that he may be attacked. They're going to try to attack him for his radical positions, but he's got a way of selling radical positions as moderate. What was his line? It's not. They call it socialist. I call it neighborly. It's just so he's got the lines that totally diffuse, and people aren't afraid of the word socialism anymore. That he can actually get away with that kind of humor. Expect him to use the sense of humor. Expect Vance to try, but he probably shouldn't try too hard because he doesn't always pull it off. I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, there are several topics that you would expect that would come up, like immigration attacking the or the Biden administration, the economy. They would say, hey, that we have a struggling economy and we need reform. Of course, we talked about reproductive rights, and there are a few other areas where you could picture the Trump team, the Vance prep team, thinking that they've got the upper hand. But like you said, I think the judo is strong with Walz because he's able to sell things as pro liberty, pro freedom, keep the government out of our lives to the greatest extent possible, extend courtesies to people that aren't like ourselves, be respectful of each other. And so that immigration policy of kerfuffle that happened in Springfield is probably going to be a question. JD Vance, do you still stand behind the pushing a false narrative and inflaming racial tensions? And he's going to say, I still think it's important to bring the attention of the media to the neglected lives of small town folks, right? So they're going to go tit for tat.
If I have to create stories, I'll do it anymore. I don't think you'll say that a second time.
No, exactly. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. So that we'll see what we expect to see, and hopefully that there's nothing too damaging to either candidate, and then they'll from both of their perspectives will be a win-win.
So we anticipate with SB 4 that cracks down on illegal entry, that should reduce the number of people coming across the border. We've already seen if you talk to Mike Banks or talk to General Seltzer, one thing they can tell you is that because of the actions that we've already taken, Texas, which used to be number one for illegal crossings, now has been displaced by Arizona, which is number one for illegal crossings. My point is that actions and deterrence work in causing the migrants to go elsewhere. With SB 4, the consequences of it are so extreme that the people being smuggled by the cartels, they will not want to be coming into the state of Texas. The cartels will not want to be coming into the state of Texas. And so we expect a dramatic drop.
All right, this brings us to our third topic. As most of the listeners and watchers know, Donald Trump has pledged to mass deport 20 million. He claims 20 million people are in that. 20 million people are here illegally from various countries. Is the number that high? Who knows? But he did pledge last time to do it. He couldn't do it. There just aren't enough courts and people on the ground and places to hold people, to be able to do it properly. And so the question is, how is he going to do this? Well, he's talking about bringing the military into it, bringing National Guard and the rest, literally to round up people. I mean, that could mean troops coming to Humboldt County and rounding up possibly 5,000 or 6,000 people. I mean, it could happen. We could see this. And how would he do it? With all of those being in court? I mean, one thing we've learned right now is there are no consequences for a president doing illegal actions right now when they're acting as president. I am actually kind of scared that what is going to happen is they're going to round people up and then just send them across the border. And then, people are going to say, that's illegal. And he's going to say, no, it's not. And what are the consequences? Impeachment? That's not going to work. There's no criminal consequences in the long run. Courts may overturn, and he'll just claim he's doing it. He's learned from Putin. No, I didn't invade Crimea, right? He can just say that. I'm worried that we're going to see a real authoritarian impulse here. And that's going to affect a lot of people. And I'm especially worried because it could scoop up citizens. Remember, his point of view is that there shouldn't be birthright citizenship. He's got an interpretation of the 14th Amendment that some right-wingers hold. I'm not going to get into the details of it right now. I think I've talked about it on another show. And then there are questions. There are people who say that the 14th Amendment was never properly ratified because two states that had already ratified it had pulled out right before it happened. And of course, the Constitution doesn't say you can pull out. It doesn't say you can't. A state can't. It's ambiguous. Constitution, I say this as a lawyer, is not the most clearly written document. It's got some real problems of interpretation. But there are people who say no, it's perfectly interpretable, and you just have to do the plain reading of it. And of course, the plain reading of it is their interpretation, just like with the Bible. That's why you have the Catholic Church, which leaves a hierarchy to interpret the Bible, as opposed to Protestantism, where anybody can do it. You got 1,000 sects, one for every person who comes up with an interpretation of the Bible. So this is I'm getting off track here, but the point is how can he do mass deportations legally? Take the legally off the back. He will do it. And right now, the Supreme Court has told them there's no consequences, and the Republican Party has said that they will block any impeachment. That's the message. It could be a really scary time.
Thank you for that setup, as always. I think we've addressed a similar topic before, but never from the perspective of, well, how is Trump going to just do it? And so when looking into this, I thought, well, I think there's going to be some resources that make sense. Turns out that Trump did an interview for Time Magazine. Eric Cortellesa wrote the story. It was a cover story. Trump's on the cover. And in that article, in that interview, they asked him, how are you going to do this mass deportation? It's what Trump refers to as a humane deportation force. And so he's got these authoritarian plans already. In that interview, he said that they were looking at about 11 million people that they were going to round up and put in migration detention camps using the National Guard to conduct the roundup. And they will tie federal funding of state and local law enforcement to the cooperation with those roundups. And so people have a vision about how to resolve the immigration crisis. Typically, what you would call a statesman or a deliberative body, a legislature, people are talking about comprehensive immigration reform. So you normalize people's status, you require them to pay some back taxes if there's no evidence that they paid taxes. You figure out a path that acknowledges people's humanity and people's lives. But in Trump's deportation plan, if you think, well, he was just riffing it in an interview, you could look to Project 2025. And I know a lot of people say there's no connection between the two. We could talk about that another time. But the bottom line is Trump's deportation plan is spelled out by policy professionals in Project 2025.
Yes.
Like I said, everything that I said so far, like what are you going to use the military for? What are you going to use the local police for? They want to track down all undocumented people. And 1/3 of all the federal judges were appointed by Trump. So it's going to be district by district challenges to the what arguably will end up being excesses or abuses of power. And truthfully, in there, it even says in the plan, it says it's not the important thing is that they will make the attempt. They will be disruptive. They will practice shock and awe. They will overwhelm the courts. They will grind the legal immigration process to a halt. And so we could talk a little bit about, other people's perspectives on it or what the overall impact might be. But I just want to give you some high level numbers. They're saying that to execute this plan, and then this is a professional observer. This isn't in Project 2025. That we're talking about 85,000 new immigration agents, 30,000 new judges and lawyers, 300,000 new detention beds. It's going to cost the average taxpayer $2,000 to pay for that mobilization. So it's really about suspending the U.S. Constitution by design. Checkpoints in the streets, checkpoints in airports. It's been referred to as an absurd violation of human rights because people have a right to representation in a court hearing, and this would just run roughshod right over that.
I could see hundreds of thousands of people being dropped into Mexico, and it's like, well, you can have your hearing there, or you can have it at the checkpoint, or whatever. You can have your lawyer sign you up. And again, what are the consequences? I mean, this is a real scary precedent that the Supreme Court has set that there is no deterrence on a president for what they do. They do not have to follow the law. They'll say, well, they can be impeached. So impeachment is not. It's a political process. It's not a legal process. It's the Senate majority leader gets to set the rules. Period. And the rules that Mitch McConnell set up for the two impeachments were ridiculously restrictive against the prosecution. Ridiculously. And they didn't hold a trial. They didn't even attempt to hold trial. There were no witnesses, no live witnesses, because there's no guidelines in the Constitution for it, and it's basically whatever the majority leader says, as long as he's got the majority behind him. So, this is this could be a very wake up moment, and of course they say, well, he won't get elected next time around. He could get away with a lot of other stuff that including talks of repealing the 22nd Amendment, which limits people to 2 terms. I mean, he has said you won't have to think about elections in the future. He keeps saying it's a joke, that the dictator thing was a joke, but he keeps saying it. He pushes it out there and normalizes the concept. And the fact of the matter is there are a significant number of people in the Republican Party, maybe a few in the Democratic Party too, but a significant amount of people in the Republican Party who say they would be willing to suspend democracy until Trump cleans the place up and then start over again next time. And it's just, like I said, 300,000 more beds. Okay, do they have 800,000 now? I don't know. I don't know what. I guess they wouldn't all be in at once. So I guess that's what they need. But 2,000. I mean, that's probably the way to kill this thing, is to say 2,000 to each taxpayer. that's probably the best way to actually defeat him on this. But I don't know. There's not a whole lot to say about it because he's not giving a lot of details. But Project 2025 does address it. It does address what they plan to do, incorporating state and local officials for it. Well, he lost the last time around. He tried to kill the sanctuary cities. There is nothing in the Constitution that says state and local authorities have to cooperate with federal authorities. They can't interfere with them, but they don't have to cooperate. And that's a decision that goes back to slavery movement when the feds were trying to, the federal marshals wanted to basically deputize local law enforcement and use their jails, and the Supreme Court determined no, the state doesn't have a right to insist that they go through their legal system, even for habeas corpus. If the federal marshals determine that they are a former slave, that's it. That they're out of here. But the same decision said, but the state of Pennsylvania nor any local towns have to lend their resources to it. That goes way back to that period of time. So trying to get state and local people to do it, well, they're probably only going to get cooperation in the red states. Certainly not going to get much cooperation in a sanctuary state like California or Oregon.
So yeah, you actually led exactly to where I was going to go next in the limited time that we have. Chris Kovacs, the Secretary of State for the state of Kansas, he was interviewed recently about how is this even possible, and they were framing it as, look, is Trump's rhetoric, is this putting people's lives at danger? Is this risking, undermining the strength of the economy, devastating the agricultural industry, devastating the hospitality sector of the economy? Like, are we really talking about a willingness to do this in the name of basically fear and contempt for the changing composition of the country, or the imperfections or dysfunctions even of the immigration policy? And so what he said is, this can be done. It needs to be done. Trump says it needs to be done, then he's going to put in place executive actions. He's got a list. We've seen it. The deportation task force, states are just going to sign on to be part of it. Right. There's 2 million criminals right away that need to go. That's how we get it through the system. That's how we fire this up at the state level.
He says there's 2 million criminals?
2 million criminals is what Trump has the leaders of the red states saying they're going to look to find.
Okay.
9 to 10 million more people that need to, this is their speaking, of course, or him, actually, he said this, Chris Kovacs, 9 to 10 million other people will need to return home and get in line if they want to come back. And that we're going to require e-verify and workplace verification in every workplace. So every person at every job will be checked to be validated. So they have a plan. I mean, it's pretty robust. And the question is, can the risk possibly be worth the reward? And I think the answer, we'll see. Can the country risk that Trump is going to be incompetent enough not to destroy the status quo of certain sectors of the economy and communities around the country? I would argue that you should listen to the president of Mexico, former president of Mexico, in this, Vicente Fox. He was asked, how is Mexico going to respond when millions of people are dumped across the border? Like, what do you think your current president's going to do? How's your country going to be a partner in this process? He said, this is not possible. And we should not even be talking about it. Like, don't even give it the credibility of your breath. Just. Right. And the truth is, well, that's you could say that from the other side of the border in Mexico as a retired president. But any coalition of human rights lawyers are saying this is an absurd violation of the Constitution, and that the idea that we would mobilize an authoritarian state in the name of ignorance and fear, let me say it this way. Let's look at it from the perspective of some of our friends who say, but what about the border problem? What about the immigration problem? Right now, the average wait for a hearing in the country is 33 days. So you want to address that and you want to say it should be within 33 hours or 3.3 days, then put in 10 or 100 times more processing money for it. Now, that's what it would take to ramp up the staffing to meet the demand. But then you could look at a state like California where the backlog could take up to 4 years. And then you could say, we need something different. Like we need to make sure that people get their day in court and that there's a mechanism for them to normalize, if they're working here through a working mechanism, they should have a working permit. If their families here, their wives, their spouses and their children are here, there should be a process. So really rounding people up using force and like going with force instead of reason is what's on the ballot here.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
Thanks, Eric. Kamala Harris has recently gone on record as saying she supports removing the filibuster in the Senate in support of passing the National Women's Health Protection Act through Congress. This legislation would remove governmental interference and intimidation from the relationship between women and their doctor, restoring family planning privacy to families and protections to their chosen medical professionals. Protecting these rights is widely supported across the country, as evidenced by polling and election results since the Dobbs decision overturned Roe. The history of the senatorial filibuster in this country is largely shrouded in myth. For example, it was not even part of the original Constitution, but instead was actually a parliamentary tool used during Reconstruction and World War I for overt political ends. My thought is that we find ourselves in a similar transformative moment in history, and the political will exists to restore reproductive rights. So my prediction is that the Democrats will hold control of the Senate in November, and that restoring reproductive rights will be one of the very first acts of the Harris presidency. Okay, really quickly, we've discussed today the 7 battleground states. I believe that Florida is going to become the 8th. James Carville, and it's not because of the polls. Polls have them all close. James Carville, in an interview, was asked, who do you think is going to win the presidency? He says, I don't know, but don't follow the polls. Look at the intangibles. It feels like Harris is going to win, but I don't know, he emphasized. It's very interesting. The intangibles are, I recommend that everybody go to YouTube and look up Latinos for Harris, and particularly the videos of the caravan of Latinos driving through Miami-Dade County, and the reactions they get with people flying Cuban flags. It is pretty amazing. I've never seen anything like this before in a support for a Democratic president. So I do believe, I don't know if Harris will flip it, but I do believe that they are going to dedicate some resources to it, because I think it's going to become a battleground state before the election is here. In the meantime, we do have an email address, redwoodwonk@gmail.com, in which we solicit questions and comments and input. And somebody recently said, "Oh, I don't hear the dogs anymore. You must have trained your dogs." Like, no, I'm doing this at my office, as you can tell by my background. No more dogs. But there was a question for Dave. Right. So the question was, do I still stand by my prediction that Senator Tester wins in Montana? And my take on this is that, like I alluded to in my prediction, that I think that the Dobbs decision really makes that marginal difference across the all demographics. And although Tester is behind by I think about 5, 6, 7 points, depending on the poll right now, I think that as we approach the election, we're going to see there's undecideds and maybe some of the other folks who this is that key issue for them, the determinative issue. I think that he'll end up squeaking out a win at holding Montana.
Well, we'll find out if any of this happens. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.